NASCAR considers upping the horsepower, a top prospect schedules his Xfinity Series debut, and Todd Gilliland joins the show. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. In just a few moments, NASCAR Cup Series driver Todd Gilliland joins the show. We've got lots of news to catch up on, but first, NASCAR history and heritage comes to life at the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Don't miss the latest edition of Glory Road, which explores racing history with 33-degree banking and 19 cars on display. Or the Ford Performance Showcase, a new inside NASCAR exhibit that showcases the design and innovation of the Ford Mustang next-gen car. Get behind the wheel of realistic racing simulators, take part in the Pit Crew Challenge, and on Mondays and Fridays, you can take a guided tour led by a Hall of Fame insider, or explore the hall at your own pace with the new Mobile Hub digital experience. Come celebrate the new inductees, Donnie Allison, Chad Knaus, and Jimmy Johnson. Their artifacts are on display in the Hall of Honor. From the legends who helped shape the sport to the new heroes looking for their own spot in the record books, the NASCAR Hall of Fame is an unforgettable experience. Book your visit today at NASCARHall.com. So much to get to today. This morning, NASCAR Cup Series Managing Director Brad Moran was on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio, and unsurprisingly, he was asked about the new tire compound that debuted at Phoenix, as well as the other aerodynamic changes. And then, of course, he was asked about the possibility of increasing horsepower.
Sure. I mean, and it's been talked about, more horsepower, smaller tires. I mean, it equates to the same you get the same results when you're done. But once we open up the horsepower, we have to have all three manufacturers obviously on board. As soon as you open that up, there's going to be development, there's going to be reliability issues, and all of these, again, putting that cost back into the engine builders. Into the engine builders category.
He says that to increase the horsepower, you would need to get all three manufacturers on board. Well, good news. In the past year, all three manufacturers have said that it wouldn't be difficult to add, say, 100 more horsepower. Sure, there could then be reliability issues. I'm sure the manufacturers would want to research and develop these changes. But based on what we've heard over the past year, that all sounds doable. So what's the real reason NASCAR won't increase the horsepower? I think Brad Moran explains here in this next clip.
And the number we're at seems to be where we want to be to try to, get potentially new manufacturers interested. And if we start getting away from that number, it can create problems in that area. But we're always open to everything. We do consider everything, and the engine gets talked about quite often. But there's a lot of different parties that have to agree before that one can happen.
Yeah, so that basically confirms rumors and reports we've heard for years now that NASCAR likes, first 550, now 670 horsepower because they believe that number is attractive to outside manufacturers. A lot of talk in recent weeks about Honda. We could see Honda, a fourth manufacturer, enter the sport in the next few years. I guess we'd have to ask them, how do they feel about a 670 horsepower engine versus, say, a 750 or 800? We'll keep things realistic. I don't think 900,000 horsepower engines will be a thing again here anytime soon. It's interesting to hear a NASCAR executive say that. It's also interesting to hear him admit that they have discussed increasing the horsepower. It's on their radar. Certainly not one of their priorities, it sounds like, but it's at least being considered. I thought the aero and tire tweaks at Phoenix this past weekend did make a difference. Not a super noticeable difference, but slightly noticeable. NASCAR showed off this stat the other day that said there were more green flag passes for position this past weekend than at any previous next-gen Phoenix race. I believe those numbers. Hey, if you had a good car on Sunday, you could make passes. Christopher Bell went from 20th to 1st in the final run of the race. I think Phoenix Raceway has its own unique issues. I think the new tire compound, maybe some of the simplified aero changes, I think that's a good direction that NASCAR should continue heading. But at some point, if the changes continue to be minimal, I do hope Brad Moran and everyone at NASCAR is willing to pull the horsepower lever and just see what 750 would do. It may not change a ton, but I can't imagine it would make things worse. And it's an easy sell to the fans. Yeah, we increased the horsepower. Everybody liked that. Time will tell, but wanted to share those comments with you guys here today. I'll give NASCAR this. The race on Sunday wasn't the most exciting, yet TV ratings, viewership, absolutely soared. Check this out. Sunday's race at Phoenix saw a 19% increase in viewership year over year. More than 4 million people tuned in to watch on Sunday. That's 3 straight Cup races with significant year-over-year increases. Atlanta was 5% higher than Fontana last year. Las Vegas was 9% higher than last year's Vegas race. 19% for Phoenix. We talked about the Chase Elliott effect. He missed Phoenix last year, probably hurt the viewership some. 19%, that's more than just the Chase Elliott effect. That's the most viewership for spring Phoenix in nearly 4 years. I'll be really curious to see the numbers this next weekend at Bristol. Bristol Dirt is gone. Bristol Concrete is returning. Typically, short tracks in small markets don't rate super highly on TV, but the last spring Bristol Concrete date was May of 2020. This was during the pandemic when NASCAR was one of the first sports back. They got 3 million viewers on cable, on FS1. That's pretty impressive. This weekend's race is on Fox. It would be awesome to see Bristol draw in roughly 4 million viewers. I would be very pleasantly surprised. Now, before Todd Gilliland, NASCAR Cup Series driver, joins the show, I want to discuss another young stock car racing prospect. Trackhouse prospect Connor Zilisch announced today that he will make 4 Xfinity Series starts this season for Junior Motorsports, driving the famous number 88. His first start will come at Watkins Glen later this summer. He'll do the Kansas race, Homestead Miami, and Phoenix later in the fall. Connor Zilisch is very young, only 17 years old. He doesn't turn 18 until July. Last season, he made his ARCA debut at Watkins Glen as well and was extremely impressive. Led the most laps, was leading until the final corner of the final lap despite the sway bar hanging off the car. Extremely impressive performance last year by a teenager. It'll be exciting to see what he can do at the Glen in an Xfinity Series car this time around. Remember, this past offseason, Zilisch signed a development deal with Trackhouse. Trackhouse is off to a pretty good start this season. On the Cup Series side, Daniel Suarez has a win. Ross Chastain is top 10 in points. Zane Smith, who's leased out to Spire, kind of struggling out the gates. But on the Xfinity Series side, Shane Van Gisbergen has finishes of 12th, 6th, and 3rd at ovals. Trackhouse has to be pleased with his development so far. It'll be really exciting to see what Connor Zilisch, very young, still pretty new to oval racing himself. It'll be exciting to see what he can do this year. He's supposed to make some Truck Series starts, some Trans Am starts, some late model starts. But we now know for sure he's got 4 Xfinity Series races on his schedule. Now I want to bring in Todd Gilliland. Todd Gilliland has turned heads so far this season. He's led laps in 3 of the first 4 Cup Series races this year. His team, Front Row Motorsports, now has an alliance with Team Penske. And Ford, this past offseason, promoted them to key partner status. Front Row Motorsports used to be an afterthought, but now they have emerged as legitimate playoff spoilers. The full interview with Todd Gilliland will be up tomorrow morning, but I wanted to share some of the most interesting topics we covered with you here today. I am now joined by NASCAR Cup Series driver Todd Gilliland. Todd, thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. And we talked before. I've watched some of your videos, and yeah, it's definitely cool to be a part of.
Take me back to your first year in Cup for a moment. I just thought of this because I guess you jumped straight from full-time trucks into full-time Cup. And I guess you're one of the first sort of recently to start doing that. We see this year with Carson Hocevar or Zane Smith is a good example. How challenging is that to go straight from kind of, the third series, shorter races, you race on Friday nights often, to the Sunday show? That's got to be a huge jump. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think in some ways it is definitely a huge and ginormous jump, and then other ways as far as the cars driving all that, I honestly felt like they drove very similar to the trucks. I was super surprised and happily surprised, obviously, to not really. Obviously, I obviously need to get better and do all the right things and work towards it, but just it wasn't relearning a whole new car. Definitely the biggest changes were the race length, and then kind of the schedule. Where it's 23 races to 33. I think after the first 5 races of my first year in Cup, I was just wiped out. Just obviously going to the Clash, West Coast, Daytona for the Daytona 500. You're just all out for 5 days, and then it's back and forth to the West Coast 3 times, dude. After that, I was just wow, what have I got myself into? But I mean, you just definitely get more used to it every time it comes and goes, and yeah, but just the first year, you have tons to learn. The next gen car is out there. Everyone's doesn't really know what to expect. And then yeah, like you said, just as far as some things are obviously working with a bigger team and trucks. It's a pretty small group of guys that,
Mhm.
I had known and I was really close with. And yeah, there's always differences, but I would say that definitely the biggest thing was, race length and definitely schedule length.
I mentioned Zane Smith a moment ago, and I do want to ask you because I imagine last year it got a little bit awkward occasionally, having to split some races from the 38 with Zane Smith. Obviously, no driver wants to see someone else get behind the wheel of their car. So, how difficult were those races for you to kind of manage last year? Or that conversation I'm sure you had with Front Row with your bosses, like how hard was that to manage last season?
Yeah, it was definitely hard to manage. Like you said, I think just kind of like I just mentioned, right? Jumping from one team to another, whether it's within the organization, and even harder, right? Going to Rick Ware Racing for those 5 or 6 races.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was tough, right? Like me and Zane are still really good friends, and like you said, it's just kind of more awkward than anything, right? Like this is you can't blame anyone for it, right? It's a business from the team side, from Zane's side, it's an opportunity to run in the Cup Series, and then it's just how it all goes, right? So. It's not the most fun thing, but you kind of have to understand it from all sides. And I really think we made the most of it. I think I was still really involved here, even throughout those races of just being part of the team still. And on the flip side, I was still getting the experience of going to those races with Rick Ware Racing and working with a new team. It's like I said, it's hard, but it's also one thing that can really make you grow as a better driver and as a better leader. So yeah, that's kind of what I was putting emphasis on during those races, and I think we still made the most of like you said, a semi awkward situation at times.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let me. Well, you're obviously with Front Row now full time for 2024, so I guess it worked out. Did you know when you signed with Front Row for this year that Front Row was going to be elevated to key partner status with Ford?
So I think kind of all those talks started, a ways back, probably like, probably middle of the summer last year. And I mean, we were hopeful. I don't know that we knew that this was gonna absolutely happen 100% until, relatively late in racing terms, right? Like probably, yeah, I don't know the exact timing, but it seemed really late. So yeah, we're really hopeful all off season. I think we're definitely working towards this goal. But at the same time, it's an expensive sport. There's, tons of stuff that goes into pretty much every single deal, right? Information is priceless eventually, right? And it's all someone that has, or it's all someone has. So, I think just hearing the negotiations just from the backside, right? It took a long time to get to a point where we're at, and just super thankful that it did. I think it's definitely elevated our team just information wise. It's awesome to have everything we need, and it's still up to our guys to make the best decisions with the information we have, and I think that's been a huge step for us.
Yeah, well, I know you're just the driver, and there's engineers. There's a lot of other folks probably more focused on managing all this new data. But I guess from your perspective, how challenging is that, or how, I guess, maybe refreshing is it to have all this new information from Ford, or you guys have a deeper technical alliance with Team Penske? Like, what's changed for you from last year to this year?
Yeah, like you said, I think, I mean, for me, not a whole lot has changed. We have a little bit of different information maybe that we can dig into for, you know, pit stops, pit road stuff, restarts, all that kind of more driver, related stuff. But I think majority of this stuff is all, the engineering side, crew chief side. We don't have a ton of people. It's still our, 2 engineers that travel with us to the race that, have a ton of information to go through, like just drowning in
They've got a lot on their
data and,
plate.
and all that stuff. Yeah, so it's still hard for sure, but our guys are working extremely hard to get through it all, and yeah, it's probably more on their plate for sure than necessarily added to mine.
A huge thank you to Todd Gilliland for taking the time out of his schedule to join us here on Out of the Groove, share some of his insight, his experience with us. That was great. Really appreciate it. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you're new to the channel and love NASCAR. And a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. Again, tomorrow morning you can catch the full Todd Gilliland interview. Keep an eye on your subscription feeds. Really appreciate the support. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you again real soon.